And welcome to our solar features, sunspots, and more section. We'll be talking about magnetism around the Earth, magnetism around the Sun, and more. So here's the geospace around planet Earth for the past 4 hours. Nothing too exciting happening there, but lots of exciting things happening on the Sun, including an Earth-facing coronal mass ejection. We'll cover that as well on our second daily space weather video of the day. The segment featuring magnetic features, solar features, and other aspects of the solar system. Again, that's 4 hours of data. Magnetohydrodynamic pressure. Next, looking at the heliospheric current sheet. Earth is in a south pole oriented when they're shown in red. Keep in mind the magnetic environment can suddenly change. And here are the GOES magnetometers over the past 3 days. Settling into a smoother regime here as a coronal hole wind stream has recently started to subside. Here's the line of sight the line of sight ecliptic plane field plot, showing a great three-dimensional view of the heliospheric current sheet there. North pole oriented current sheet shown in green. And next, the line of sight coronal hole plot. You can see the B field here crossing over the earthly zone in between a north and south pole oriented coronal hole. So you can see coronal hole systems over here in the north pole orientation, coronal holes over here in the south pole orientation. They are all transequatorial, another indication of solar uptick in activity as the solar polar fields migrate to the opposite poles throughout the cycle. Here's a great visual of those coronal holes. You can see a pretty well-defined one here rotating in. It's south pole oriented. It's on the eastern side. We've got 2 new sunspots rising as well. We'll get to that next. And again, we've got a coronal mass ejection likely to strike the Earth associated with an M-class solar flare to cover. So likelihood of major flares has gone way up. Sunspot 2936 is right in the Earth-facing zone at the moment. You can see there just crossing the polar meridian. Solar flare watch. In effect, we could see X-class flares come from Sunspot 2986. Don't be surprised to see massive radio blackouts as a result of that. So here's a visual of the sunspot scenario. Again, we've got 2 new sunspots rising. These are already sunspots over here having risen over the eastern limb. Sunspot 2936 is the star of the star. We covered it pretty in-depth yesterday as well. Some fantastic imagery to follow. Here's a close-up. You can actually see that flare event creating a little light bridge there across the umbra, the leading North Pole umbra there of Sunspot 2936. That would be this umbra right here. Great example of an M-class solar flare happening there. Here's 94 angstroms. This is one of the best wavelengths through which to view solar flares. We'll let that play through a second time. So some great imagery here coming out from the SDO once again. Here's 304 angstroms. Now we're on ionized helium. You can see great filamentary resolution here showing up. Those white areas are very high in ionized helium. The dark areas are very low in ionized helium. And here's 131 angstroms, the other of 2 of the best wavelengths to view solar flares. This one in 94, they take 5 times as many images as the other wavelengths, taking 10 images per minute instead of only 2. And here's a crowd and personal favorite, 171 angstroms, another ionized iron spectra. It's iron 9. 8 times ionized iron. The lower corona represented here. So here's the flare that we're talking about. It was an M-class flare. It happened around 2320. It was a long duration solar flare, and we saw another large C-class flare. Since then, don't be surprised to see additional M or even an X-class flare. No relativistic particles have shown up at Earth yet. We don't expect any from that solar flare and CME, but we do expect some CME to be striking Earth. Solar wind has diminished here over the past 24. It did rise a little bit as we forecasted yesterday. It made it up to about 560 kilometers per second, now down to about 470 kilometers per second. Solar wind density 7.24 protons per cubic centimeter. Nothing too exciting going on there. KP index, a measurement of global geomagnetism, is at 2, following a somewhat prolonged period of geomagnetic unrest on the 29th and late on the 28th. Next, a solar system forecast. Here's where stuff is now. And there's where things will be in a week. We'll have a crescent waxing moon as Mercury and Venus speed around to the opposite side of the sun. If you're up before dawn, you may see a series of objects. Mars, the moon, Venus, and Mercury rising ahead of the sun. If you've got a low horizon, it's quite a good view. And here's a good view from Stereo A at Lagrange 5 and the LASCO C2 at Lagrange 1. It's a coronal mass ejection. So from Stereo A's perspective, Earth would be off to the right. And we do expect some of this ejecta to strike Earth. It's not a direct blow. It's more, most of the ejecta is expected to miss Earth to the northeast. We do see some additional ejecta on the far side of the sun there as well. Obviously, that's nowhere near the Earth. Great imagery there. And you can see this looks like a halo, at least a partial halo. And halo CMEs, coronal mass ejections, are the kind that tend to strike Earth, as the halo indicates that plasma is moving directly toward the coronagraph, which is located right between Earth and Sun at Lagrange point 1. We'll let that play through one more time before we move on. And thanks for tuning in to our solar features and close-up section, the magnetic environment, and more. Here at the Smash News Network, least busted name in news. Make sure you check out our next premiere as well. We'll be doing one more. It's our bonus feature segment. And may that solar wind be at your back.